Welcome to Power Lunch Live. I'm Rhett Power, your host. It's good to be with you here on Friday. Hope you're staying healthy and safe and all that kind of good stuff. It's been a great week here on the show. Had a bunch of great guests. We're going to end it on a high note, I think, as well. We're going to talk about podcasting today and how to do that successfully. Now, the point of the Power Lunch Live is to have today's thought leaders, best-selling authors, people who are doing amazing work in the world that we can learn from to get better at what we do. So the way that happens, though, one of the best ways is that it's interactive. So ask your questions. Get on LinkedIn Live. Type your questions in. We monitor the feed during the show. You can also do that on Facebook because we broadcast on Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, Twitch, and probably something else that I'm forgetting. So please do ask those questions. We like questions. We like them a lot. So do our guests. If you like the program, give it a like or share so that your network can benefit from these conversations. Today, I've got Ben Krueger. Ben is amazing with what he does in terms of podcasting. He's called the Podcast Educator, and he's founder of Cashflow Podcasting. Ben helps leaders, authors grow authority and influence through podcasting, and we had the pleasure of having him here today. Ben, welcome.
Excited to be here. Excited to talk shop. Always love chatting podcasting. So thanks for having me on, Rhett.
It's not a passion, is it?
No, I mean, it's a healthy hobby. Let's call it that.
Fair enough. It seems to me, we're in interesting times, no doubt. But it seems to me everybody's doing a podcast these days. What are you listening to right now? What exciting podcast are things that you're listening to that could give us? I know we're not going to talk about that today much, but I did want to ask: is there anything interesting that you're listening to?
I like it because being someone who has been I've been in the podcasting space since like 2013, and so I have been exposed to, worked on, been around so many podcasts and podcasters. So at this point, I go through cycles, but right now there's one show that I really have been diving into and enjoying, because it's around a topic that I'm excited about at the moment, which is essentially managing and learning to manage your own thoughts, positive, negative, and otherwise. So it's a show called Caffeine for the Soul by Michael Neal. And so, it's part business, but mostly it is learning your own like mental mechanics and kind of relaxing into and allowing yourself to tap into where you are most powerful and most naturally abundant and good at what you do, as opposed to trying to do the self-help push and force and make things happen. So that's kind of been my listen at the moment, and I love it because it's little short snippets, a couple days a week, and so it's perfect to go for a little walk and tune in. Nice.
I always love to get some good recommendations, so thank you. Appreciate that very much. Right now, I wanted to talk about your company and what you do and how it works, and because I think one of the it's a challenge to start to do a show, do it well. I mean, I've done a couple. This gets turned into a podcast, and so how do you do it well? What's the secret to really doing it well? And then I want to talk a little bit about because I think a lot of times people start these things without a budget in mind,
or a plan.
Or a plan, right? And I think that's where probably some go wrong. But I'm going to let's listen to the expert here. What is the challenge? Where do you start?
Yeah, so this is obviously a little bit of a deep topic, so we could talk for days on this. But what I have found kind of the fundamental and primary difference between shows that do well and shows that don't, and we're talking from a business context here. So if you've got a hobby show or something, some of these will apply, but not necessarily. So fundamentally, we've found that there's tons of different strategies, there's tons of different tactics, but they boil down to many of the same foundational principles of what makes them successful across the board. So, regardless of what industry you're in. So a few of them, and we already touched on, one of the first ones, excitingly, is to have very clear objectives of what the podcast is there to do. What's the point? And kind of starting with that end in mind. Because without that, you're kind of swinging around in the dark. You're not really sure where anything is going. And, podcasting, just like any other marketing channel medium, operates on many of the same principles as marketing as a whole. So essentially what it comes down to with podcasting is having clarity about where you're going, what the point is. And then kind of the second part of that is figuring out and having clarity around your audience. So if all right, this is what we're here to do. This is the objective. This is what we're trying to do. These are the people that we're here to do it for. These are the people that we're here to educate, to advocate for. And one misconception that I see a lot is shows that tend to struggle try to be too broad. They try to be everything for everybody, or they try to be like a general industry show. And podcasting is mature enough at this point that doesn't fly very well. There's enough, other content creators out there who've been at it longer than you have to, make it so that unless you have a bit of a unique approach and a unique group that you're there to share a message for, that it's easy to kind of get lost in the jungle and the sea of noise. But what it comes down to, we've seen, is an easy filter for this is you solve one particular problem for one particular audience. So one specific group of people, because that really allows for the show to resonate strongly and then to actually grow within that group. So you get to be the big fish in a small pond versus, a fish in the ocean kind of a deal.
Do you have any examples of that narrowing down?
Yeah, absolutely. Because that's right where I was headed. So a great example of this, a client of ours, Katrina Ubell, has a podcast, Weight Loss for Busy Physicians. It is incredibly specific. She works with women physicians and she helps them lose weight, especially, women who've struggled for a long time. And she does it through helping them change their relationship with their body, their relationship with food, their relationship with stress. And she does it for women physicians because she herself is a physician. So that's a great example. Another great one, and of course I'm kind of plucking out some of the more pristine, dialed in examples here. But there's another show that we work on called Dentist Freedom Blueprint, and it's all about helping dental practice owners build long-term wealth and invest, but through real estate and other investment vehicles, not necessarily be at the whim of the stock market. So it's insanely specific, but we've seen time and time and time again, the more someone can be mayor of a small town and really figure out what these people's pain points are, what dreams and aspirations they have, and have some real understanding of them, that's where shows really, really resonate. Because you can imagine as well, if you work with a woman as a physician who struggles with her weight, like the light bulb in your head goes off of, oh, maybe this would be helpful for you. And it's such a low risk way to share something. You're not directly introducing anybody. You're not doing anything. It's a free resource they can check out.
Now, are the two examples that you gave, are they monetizing the podcast? Are they selling their service to sort of solve that problem? I mean,
Okay. Yeah. So this is great. This is the difference between, a lot of people start with podcasting and one of the first questions is, how do I monetize? Which that question is a little off, because the idea here really is, if you're starting a podcast for your business, your podcast is your way to create a relationship with your audience, nurture those folks, help them, teach them, advocate for them, and essentially help them get small results in advance so that when they are ready for a bigger result, you're the obvious choice and they know what those next steps are to engage you on a deeper level. Whereas, businesses don't say, how do I monetize my Twitter account? Twitter has its purpose in supporting the business. And that's where podcasting should be thought of if you're a business and you're looking to use podcasting to support the business.
Right. So, okay. So that makes a lot of sense. So different purposes, different sort of motives for doing, that makes sense. So you have 8 podcast principles. You mind sharing them with us?
Yeah, so we've already tickled into the first few. Number 1 is objective. So starting with the end in mind, having a clear idea of where you're going, and kind of what the point is. And what we found as well is there's some objectives that are a lot better than others in terms of, what podcasting is good at helping you do. Fundamentally, we found the highest objective is creating deep, intimate relationships with your existing audience and essentially advocating for those individuals and people who are a good fit for what you do in your work will naturally attract to your solution. And we'll kind of talk a little bit more about, there's a principle that kind of connects the two, but going into it with the idea of I want to grow my audience, that's great, but that comes as a byproduct, generally speaking. So 1 is objective, 2 is your audience. So you solve one specific problem for one specific group of people. And the more specific you can get, the better. Number 3 is mindset. And we've also kind of brushed on this a little bit as well, but your mindset for podcasting should be, I'm here to serve my audience and serve my industry. I'm here to support and advocate for them. And that mindset just shines through incredibly authentically through podcasting. Podcasting really highlights and creates transparency. So if you are only in it for yourself and you don't care about your audience, you don't care who they are, boy, it's going to show in the podcast. It shows, and it's ugly. It's not pretty. So, one question that I see working really well for mindset is, for great podcasters, is what's in my audience and industry's best interest. So if you're thinking about what content to record, if you're thinking about how long should my episodes be, should I have this person on as an interview guest or not? Is it in your audience's best interest? Yes or no? It kind of creates a nice little filter and allows you to make sure that you are in fact advocating for your people. So one great example of this mindset is a gentleman, Michael Kitzes. So he has a blog, kitzes.com. He's a big educator in the financial advisor space. So he teaches a lot of financial advisors how to break out and create their own advisory practice. And on his about page, it says, and under his picture, it's like, I want to learn as much as I can about the finance industry and then share what I learn with others. That is like the optimal mindset when it comes to podcasting. Yeah,
I love that. And so that's 4 principles. What are the other 4?
So we have content, and we can dive into whichever one really gets you most interested right off the bat here. So we've got your content, your schedule, which is essentially the cadence of how frequently you record and release content, your marketing, which is how you actually share that episode content with your audience and with new people, your funnel, which is how people go from podcast listener to potential customer. And I'm not a huge fan of the word funnel, but we're running with it for now. And your offer, which is essentially the product, service, whatever you do to help people get the result or move towards what they want. And so having kind of that clear stair step and having all of the pieces in place, and kind of this rounded out strategy is what makes podcasting work really well, is kind of having all of them done pretty well. And if you've got a few categories that are just out of the park, then that's, icing on the cake.
All right. So let's say you have a pretty narrow focus. You have the ability to get good guests and you have a real clear vision for what you want and the problem that you're going to solve. What's the best format? What should you expect to sort of spend on putting together a really good podcast? Because I think you got to have some expectation that you're going to
around budget,
production work done. You're going to have some of that to really make it good.
Yeah. So the long and the short of it is there's lots of options to get support around podcasting nowadays. And so there's an option at every level, and it's a trade-off of time and money. So if you've got time and very little money, software is going to be your first stop. There's a lot of software options that simplify the process, and it so happens we're using one right now to do this conversation. But fundamentally, on that side, you can go relatively cheaply, and you can get a podcast up and running, have it hosted, have a microphone, have a way to do recordings for. You're looking at probably $100 on the super cheap side if you're really strapped for cash, but you just want to get it rolling. If you want to put together a professional business podcast and you actually want some help from a strategy standpoint, which in my approach to business, I always think that's the best place to invest is the strategy side, because the tactical piece can be pretty easy. So that on that end, you are looking anywhere from the, 4 or 5K to, on the pricier end, maybe 8, 9, 10K for the launch and production of the first, I'd say 3 months worth of episodes. And on that side, that can also get you like strategy plus implementation. Because you can also do, there's pretty much every flavor in between. You can join a coaching group that teaches you the strategy, but then you have to implement yourself. And then there's, kind of the nuts and bolts services where they handle the service side, but you have to come up with what the podcast is. You figure out the strategy and you tell them what to implement. And so both of those are going to be a little bit cheaper. You're probably looking in the, 1,000 to 3,000 range on both of those. But, again, those are assuming you have the time to do one or the other, or you have the understanding to do one or the other. So what I advocate for in general is for people to get help at whatever level they're at, because end of the day, your biggest contribution is being the topic expert, being the host of the show, and being that advocate for your audience, not, messing around in audio editing software and trying to figure out how that works.
Yeah, that's not where your value is. So when you say strategy, what you're saying is you're talking about sort of the messaging. You're talking about the time, how many, how often you do it, the schedule, that kind of stuff, right?
Yeah. So what kind of content are we recording? What's the format of our episodes? What's the listener experience we're going for? So if somebody, is listening, what kind of experience do we want them to walk away with this from? If I am a coach, let's say, like an online business coach, the positioning that we're going to want for the host is going to be different than if, let's say, I am in an industry where my highest priority is networking and connecting with potential B2B biz dev individuals, whether that's on like the client side or developing relationships. So with a perfect example is, should I do interviews or should I do solo style episodes?
I was going to ask you about that. Yeah.
Yeah. And this dovetails in nicely. So, and we'll use some examples of the clients I've already talked about here. Katrina Ubel. So she hosts the show about weight loss for busy physicians. She is a weight loss coach for women who have struggled to lose weight. her objective in the show is to create content that is helpful for her audience, helps them shift some mindsets and start to get some results, like start down this path. And then if they really want the fast track, if they really want that, one-to-one help, that's what her offer is all about. She's got the right offer to help them get there. But in order to position herself as that coaching individual, she's going to want to do, and she does do, mostly just teaching episodes where she teaches concepts, she teaches mindsets, and she helps her audience understand their own mentality, their own mindsets, their own sticking points better, so that when they are, on this weight loss journey, they're already looking at her as a coach, even if they just listen to the podcast. They've already taken some of that advice. And if they're implementing some of that advice, they're getting some results. So that's social proof. That's the, taste tester at the grocery store type of thing. It's brilliant, brilliantly effective for any coaching or consultative advice-based stuff. So, works really well in the financial advice space and business coaching and really any of that kind of coaching and advice space. Right. And that doesn't mean that you can't do interviews. She sprinkles in interviews from time to time. But the solo style really works well for positioning her as that coaching individual. Now, on the other side of it, David Phelps, who runs the Dennis Freedom Blueprint podcast, he is kind of a coach in the sense that he runs the program, but largely within the program, it's a community, it's a group of people, and he's trying to build a community around this brand, around this mission for dental practice owners. So he does interviews largely with dental practice owners who, invest in alternatives to the stock market. Surprise, surprise. And a good portion of them are individuals who are either in his group, in his network, or they are individuals who, are outside of it, but are kind of like case studies, can be looked at as case studies and experts in whatever their particular vertical is. Maybe it's multifamily real estate, maybe it's, whatever. But you can see there where doing interviews is going to be great at creating that community sense. And each interview then, acts as a case study of sorts. And especially if he's bringing on members of his own community, then it builds this beautiful Rolodex of social proof.
Right. Yeah, no, it proves it. I mean, it's fantastic. So talk about a little bit of how some people, we alluded to this earlier, and we talked about how you can't really start with the premise of monetizing it. But I'm curious how some of the successful podcasts actually do monetize their show.
Yeah. So the core methods you're looking at is selling your own products and services, which is kind of what we've been talking about so far. Sponsorships and ads, and there's a few other kind of side methodologies like donation-based shows, which work really well for causes. And if you are associated with charitable organizations as a business or as a brand, that can work really well, particularly if you can raise money for the cause through the podcast. So, any philanthropic organizations, that kind of thing. But primarily for businesses, you're looking at sponsors and ads and selling your own products and services, which with one caveat of like affiliate and referral marketing. But that could kind of be classified as either one of those, depending on who you ask. What I've found though, in the ad side of things, generally speaking, for small businesses doing a podcast, their audience isn't going to be large enough to make a significant income from podcast ads. So, for most shows, you're looking at a potential ad revenue of $20 to $60 per 1,000 downloads per episode. And that, the 20 to 60 is based on how many ads do you have in, how long are the ads, so there's a range there. But you can see, unless you've got a pretty decent amount of downloads on a regular basis and you're releasing content pretty regularly, it might pay for itself, but it's not going to be, a profit center. Now, the other way you can do this is a little bit more Wild West and deal maker style, where you can essentially approach companies or approach organizations where you have a lot of alignment with them, with their vision, with their mission, what they're doing, and it's super relevant to your audience. And you can essentially present them with the opportunity of sponsoring the podcast. And one of the great ways that we've seen this done really well is industries where there are conferences, and you can look up online all of the tiers of sponsors for these major conferences. Usually you can figure out very easily how much they paid to be a sponsor. And usually there's a significant additional cost associated with getting all the stuff for the booth there, getting the people from the company for the booth there. And so you can look up the numbers of individuals that go to the conference. And so that's a great way to approach a company that you really resonate with what they do, and present the podcast as a potential opportunity for them to sponsor or to partner with you on a podcast, and share, some of the finance side of it. At the same time, adding value to your audience, because a big piece of ads and sponsorships is, I'm a firm believer that you should never use a sponsor or an ad or accept money to promote anybody for a service that you either wouldn't use yourself or that you wouldn't actively recommend to other people, because it's a great service. So this is where it comes back to the authenticity piece. If you can't send people to that service on the merit of the service and the value that it provides for people, then it's probably not going to be something that you should promote, because that will definitely have a negative effect on your relationship with your audience.
Okay, I believe that, and that makes sense to me. Let me ask you about marketing, because I would imagine of the million podcasts that are out there, I don't know what the numbers are, I'm just taking a stab at it.
Yep.
That most of them have very few views.
Yes.
So talk about for a minute, how to market your podcast, if you're, and I think most people probably don't have much budget to market and to do ads and things like that. But how do you market? How do you get your podcast out there?
Yeah, so there's a couple of routes. What we found far and away, podcasting works really, really well as an audience nurture tool, and isn't necessarily the best audience creation tool or audience building tool if you're starting with no audience or a really small audience. Okay. So I've seen it very much like, it's like rolling a snowball down a hill. If you start with a snowball, especially if it's super tightly packed, like, let's say it's dental practice owners that want to invest in real estate, or, women physicians who want to lose weight. That's what I consider a tightly packed snowball. Then, that can pick up momentum on its own as you get it rolling down the hill. And I'll talk about that in a second. However, podcasting, if you, let's say you go into business, you are a women's business coach, and you start a podcast because you want to coach women on entrepreneurial success, and you don't really have an email list or a social list or any kind of following there. Your saving grace in terms of podcasting is going to be any groups that you are already an active participant in, and you can share the podcast as a valuable asset and resource for them. So this is where it kind of comes into if you have a general topic, it's much more challenging to get that initial packed snowball of audience members. Whereas, if you have a very clear idea of who it is you work with, how you help them, and the podcast is a natural extension of that, then it becomes something that you can very easily share in these groups as a value add without it being, hey, I just launched a podcast, go check it out. How many times have we all heard that? You want to lead with value by using specific episodes to answer people's questions, to share. Let's say you feature somebody from within that group that you're going to share it in. You can say, hey, I had so and so on as a guest, and really had a great time talking about so and so topic. Wanted to share it in this group because we're both members here. Yada yada. So that's one route. I have not seen paid ads directly to podcast episodes work out very well. Unless you have really, really high margins, that's a tough game to play. What I have seen work really well is using paid ads to an email opt-in, like, Facebook ads to an email opt-in, let's say, whether it's a checklist or an ebook or, whatever a lot of businesses are using already anyways. And then adding the podcast in the email follow-up sequence as a additional resource for people to dive into to understand the topic better. And better yet than saying like, oh yeah, we have this podcast, go check it out. You can do even if you're a relatively young show, you can still do here's our top 3 most listened to episodes. And usually it'll be around particular topics that are of interest to any new subscribers. So it'll be, common pitfalls and mistakes and challenges to avoid. That's like one of the all-time greats, But that's a great way to grow a podcast audience over time, because I think about it like this. You're not just trying to grow your podcast audience. You're trying to grow the audience of your brand and of the folks that you are there advocating for, educating and contributing to. The podcast is one channel of that. So I see it as the podcast needs to play nicely with the other channels that you've got going on as well, whether that's email, Twitter, Facebook, LinkedIn, whatever. So the goal isn't necessarily the podcast needs to grow all on its own. The podcast needs to grow with the environment as the whole environment grows. Now, the one thing that I was saying at the beginning of if you have a tightly packed group, like I don't really like the word, but niche. If you've got a niche or a very specific group, then what it allows you to do very easily is grassroots growth, which just means when people are listening to the podcast, it's easy for them to think, oh, this would actually be helpful for this other person, because they know now how to identify who those people are. If you're a weight loss, if you're a woman interested in weight loss as a physician, it's real hard to not think of, weight loss for busy physicians. But we can also even prime that by sharing in our episodes, hey, today we talked about how to mentally prepare for the holidays so that you don't, relapse into unhealthy eating habits. If there's someone that comes to mind when you think of this topic who would really benefit from today's episode, we'd really appreciate if you shared this episode with that one person. So it's this one-to-one sharing. It's kind of that direct referral style of grassroots growth. And a lot of folks in the, consulting, services, coaching in those industries, the best leads are the direct referrals. And so we found this with podcast listeners as well. They tend to be the best, most engaged listeners who, have the best likelihood of actually engaging you on a deeper level and becoming clients over time.
Tell me quickly about, we're at the end of almost at the end of our time, but I do want to have you sort of give a pitch for Cashflow Podcasting and and because I do think there are a lot of people that have great content, right? And they just need the help to get the word out and to do it really well. Can you give us a brief pitch there?
Absolutely. So I think it's easiest. Our first client, we did some podcast production back in the day for shows that existed and just wanted us to handle the audio production in the back end. But it really got interesting and exciting for me when Andrew Udarian approached me. He runs E-commerce Fuel, which is a paid community for e-commerce store owners. Right. And he said, I want to start a podcast. I'm not really sure what I'm doing. I know about my topic, but I just want to show up and be the host. And I want to do it right. I want strategy, and I want somebody to set it all up for me so that I can just show up behind the microphone and the rest is handled for me. And so fundamentally, that's what we've set up in our services. Our flagship program, the Podcast Launch Program, that's where we work with folks who have an idea for a show. They want to host a podcast, but they want to do it right. They want coaching and strategy to make sure that it's set up right from the beginning. And then they want the implementation. So essentially, we partner and collaborate with folks to make sure that they can have an incredible podcast for their brand that actually drives tangible business results. And then their primary job is showing up as the host. We handle all the post-production, all the sharing, all of the strategy and technical setup of the show, so that they can focus on what they're best at and where their highest value is. So that's the elevator pitch of sorts for Cashflow Podcasting. Okay,
fantastic. I highly recommend, if you're thinking about a podcast, or even if you're doing one right now, and you really want some help to launch it well, launch it properly, so that you have maximum impact on your audience. I highly recommend getting in touch with Ben. We've actually put the links in the show notes here on LinkedIn, so you should be able to see those websites now. But anyway, Ben, thank you so much.
Absolutely. Thanks so much for having me on. I always, you can tell I get all worked up talking about this stuff. So it's fun.
And I'm going to take your advice. If you know someone that should listen to this episode, appreciate the immediate coaching. I'm going to start doing that at the end.
Here we go.
Please do send this or forward this to somebody that might need to hear this conversation and could benefit from Ben and his work. And thank you for spending some time with us today. Have a great weekend. You can check out next week's schedule at powerlunch.live. Powerlunch.live. Got a great lineup next week. We'll see you then. Have a great weekend.